This is what I can suggest. It will be much better to go to our scientists in the State Museum and to talk with. They show you a lot of plans which we still have in the archives.
Where would that be?
I don't think that it's open today, but probably in Monday it will be possible.
That's the Auschwitz State Museum?
Yes.
Is that in Oswiecim? Is that
here, in block number
in
24 and 23, I'm not sure about
Would
this.
it be possible for me to make an appointment to see him on Monday, perhaps?
That's true.
So it was here that it was first suggested I meet with the head of archives and senior curator, Dr. Franciszek Pieper. Still, fearing that such a meeting might not come about, and assuming that the supervisor was probably in the loop regarding any reconstructions, I decided to get her input regarding the supposedly original holes in the ceiling. Are those the original holes in the ceiling?
No.
They've been rebuilt?
Yes.
Okay. After the war?
After the war.
So, if you're keeping score, that makes it 1 vote for original, 1 vote for not original. I guess that would make Dr. Pieper the tiebreaker. Now, before we proceed any further, a little digression is needed about some genuine Holocaust revisionism. Dr. Franciszek Pieper is one of the Holocaust experts most directly responsible for the lowering of the Auschwitz death count. Along with other scholars like Israeli Holocaust expert Dr. Yehuda Bauer, it was decided around 1989 to admit publicly that fewer people died at Auschwitz than had previously been reported. In his book, Auschwitz, How Many Perished, Dr. Pieper concludes that the old Soviet-provided figure of 4 million is wrong, and that the real figure is closer to 1.1 million. Now that's no small revision, an admission that the Soviets exaggerated the figure by almost 4 times. We can also see how the fraudulent figure has been an ingrained part of supposedly factual Holocaust history for almost 50 years. As late as 1988, in the official Auschwitz State Museum guidebook, you'll find on page 19 an official affirmation of the 4 million figure. The Soviet State Extraordinary Commission for the Investigation of Nazi Crimes stated that no less than 4 million people perished in Auschwitz. The Supreme National Tribunal in Poland stated that about 4 million persons perished in Auschwitz. According to the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg, more than 4 million persons perished in Auschwitz. And these figures are based upon the evidence of hundreds of surviving prisoners and upon the opinion of experts. Well, this shows that not only was fraudulent Soviet evidence admitted as fact at Nuremberg, but also that survivors and experts can be wrong. And, if it matters, many Holocaust revisionists believe that the actual total of dead at Auschwitz is even less than 1.1 million. But still, there is no possibility that even the most extreme Holocaust revisionist in the world could possibly revise the figure any more than the Holocaust experts already have. Which rather neatly brings us to this man, Dr. Franciszek Pieper. I interviewed him in his office at the Auschwitz State Museum. At first, he was a little apprehensive about being videotaped. But I explained to him that since I already had the tour guide on tape, giving out what I had now come to believe was incorrect information, I should have a videotape which could set the record straight. Once he consented, I immediately asked him about changes made in the gas chamber.
The first and the oldest gas chamber which existed in Auschwitz I, this camp were now here, operated from autumn 1941 to December 1942, approximately 1 year. Crematorium nearby this gas chamber worked longer to the middle of 1943. In July 1943, the crematorium was stopped and the bodies of the prisoners died in Auschwitz I were from the time transferred to Birkenau. In 1944, in connection with the bombardment of Auschwitz by Allies air forces. Empty crematorium number 1 and gas chamber in Auschwitz 1 were adopted as air shelter. At the time, the additional walls were built inside the former gas chamber. The additional entrance was made from the east side of the gas chamber, and the openings in the ceiling, the gas cycle B was discharged inside, were at that time liquidated. So, after the liberation of the camp, the former gas chamber presented the view of air shelter. In order to gain the earlier sight of this object, the inside walls built in 1944 were removed, and the opening and the ceiling were made anew. So now this gas chamber is very similar to this one which existed in 1941-1942. But not all details were made there, so there is no gas-tight doors, for instance, additional entrance from the east side, rested as it was made in 1944. Such changes were made here after the war in order to gain the real view of this object.
Were the holes in the ceiling put in the same way that they were?
Yes, in the same place, because the traces were visible on the ceiling.
Here, I think we should recap what Dr. Pieper has told us. According to him, the room was a gas chamber, but was later turned into an air raid shelter, at which time dividing walls were built, the holes in the ceiling were removed, and a new door was added on one side of the gas chamber. However, after the camp's liberation, the dividing walls were knocked down, the holes were put in the ceiling, however, the new door was not removed. I think here there are three main points that have to be made. The first of these is that we are looking at a clear deception. As I have shown, the gas chamber is shown off to tourists as being in its original state, even though the museum officials know better. Dr. Pieper appears to be very nonchalant about the fact that changes were made after the war. But if it isn't such a big deal, then why hide it from the tourists? And that's not all. In May of 1992, British historian David Irving was fined by a German court for telling a meeting in Munich exactly what you've just heard Dr. Pieper tell you. In fact, Pieper was even called as a defense witness, but the judge wouldn't allow him to testify, even though it might have cleared Irving. Once again, I'll say, if this is not such a big deal, why fine somebody for saying it? Our next point is, the gas chamber is no longer valid as proof in its present state. It is not a proof of homicidal gassings unless it can be shown that, at some time during the war, this building had 4 holes in the ceiling and no dividing walls, during the time the Germans were operating the camp. Which brings us to our final point. The reconstruction itself. With the information we now have, we can say that there are 2 different views of the gas chamber reconstruction. The first one, the official view, holds that the Soviets and Poles created a gas chamber in an air raid shelter that had been a gas chamber. The revisionist view holds that the Soviets and Poles created a gas chamber in an air raid shelter that had been an air raid shelter. So, how do we know which one is correct? Well, obviously the burden of proof is on those who say that there was a gas chamber at one time in that building. Do they have any evidence at all to support that claim? In my tenure as a Holocaust revisionist, I'm sure if there was any, I'd have seen it. I can also add that those questionable 4 holes in the roof of the building are not detectable in any of the aerial photograph blow-ups that I've seen. To get to the truth of this matter, there are some other pertinent questions that can be asked. If there was at one time a functioning gas chamber in this building, why was its operation halted, especially if the Nazis were running Auschwitz as an extermination center?